I just want to say something about Jono. First of all, you are one of my environmental heroes, Jono. And you've worked tirelessly for the betterment of our environment in Sarasota County for years and years and years. And we thank you. I thank you heartily. And we all thank you heartily for everything that you've done. And I don't know if you have a book. Have you written a book?
Yes, and you'll hear about it.
A biography?
No, not a biography, sorry.
But anyway, I know you've written a book and you can tell us about the books too. But thank you for being who you are, Jono. You've been a wonderful asset to our community. And I'm very proud to know you.
You can thank New College.
Yeah, right. New College.
Yeah.
Margie, go ahead. You could introduce Jono then with the full bio here.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Jono Miller. And remember, his name is pronounced Jono. And he's going to be speaking about more than you thought possible about cabbage palms, Florida's state tree. So Jono has written a book, the Palmetto Book, The Histories and Mysteries. He is a retired former director of the New College of Florida Environmental Studies program, which is his undergraduate alma mater. Jono is a natural historian, environmental educator, and activist.
Mm-hmm.
We need that. We so need that. Who has worked for 49 years to understand and protect the wild places in Southwest Florida. He's provided leadership on protecting over 60,000 acres in Sarasota County. And for the past dozen years, he's been chronicling the natural and cultural history of our state tree, the cabbage palm, which was an effort that became his master's thesis in the Florida Studies program at USF in St. Pete. So please do get his book, the Palmetto Book, again, Histories and Mysteries of the Cabbage Palm. It contains 24 chapters exploring the various aspects of this iconic Florida native. Jono, it's my pleasure. Take it away.
Thank you. Let me share screen here. Okay, how does that look?
Looks great.
Okay. So there I am with a copy of my book. We'll talk more about that later. I'm going to start with just some basics because you never know how much people are starting with. We may have obviously people not in Florida. So the cabbage palm's Latin name is Sabal palmetto. The genus is Sabal, genus Palmetto, and it is in the palm family, and we'll talk more about that later. The palm that most people seem to be familiar with is the coconut palm. And I'm going to explain how a coconut palm differs from a cabbage palm. So coconut palm canopy, the fronds are pretty conspicuous. You can see each one individually. They seldom look like a big spear. Let's go here. So they're pinnate. That means they're feather-like. You can see how those fronds look like feathers. The leaf scars where the leaves were attached, they typically go around the trunk and they're pretty conspicuous. The trunks frequently lean, the trunks frequently taper, and they're usually found in a coastal setting. A cabbage palm, on the other hand, has canopy that is either spherical or sort of haystack shaped. The fronds are what's called costopalmate, and we'll talk about that later. Leaf scars are pretty hard to see usually. They're typically vertical. They can bend and fall over, but in general, they tend to grow straight up. The trunk width typically does not taper, and they can be found both on the coast or inland. So this is the historic range as mapped by U.S. Forestry. Most of peninsular Florida up the coast, east coast, as far as Cape Fear and North Carolina, and over to about Panama City. It's believed the cabbage palms could grow in a much broader area. And that's sort of reflected if you go to iNaturalist, you can see where people have reported seeing them. So more than what was historically true. And a lot of that has to do with people transplanting them. So we have other Sabal palms in Florida. We have Sabal etonia. This is grown in a sort of landscape context, but they're more typically found in this Florida scrub called scrub palmetto. And these are palms that seldom develop a trunk. They just sort of stay as a low-growing Sabal. I guess if you weren't looking closely, you might confuse them with a saw palmetto. And then there's another Sabal, which is Sabal minor. I call it swamp palmetto. Some people call it blue stem, but usually find it in moist conditions. So I think swamp palmetto is probably a good name. It's also called dwarf palmetto, but that's Sabal minor. So I mentioned costa palmate. The costa is this sort of spear-shaped organ at the end of the leaf blade, and that's where a lot of the leaf segments originate from. So it's not like a long feather with a single rachis. It sort of comes to this point and then they fan out from there. Now, cabbage palms have what are called bootjacks. And if you've seen a cabbage palm, this one has been pruned. And so you get this distinctive sort of basket weave crisscross effect. This is a picture I took of one that died out at the celery fields. And you can see the leaves are actually split and attached to the trunk in two different places. And we can talk about that later if people are curious about that. A funky fact is that when there's a windstorm from one direction, the leaf stem, the rachis, will point in the direction that the wind came from. So in this photograph, all the wind came from the top of the screen. So here's a bootjack on the ground, and here's how you use it as a bootjack. You step on one end, put your boot in the crotch there and pull up, and it removes your boot. It basically does the opposite of a shoehorn. Now, elsewhere in the US, you have to buy a bootjack or make one, but here in Florida, they're just found lying on the ground. So here you can see the bootjacks. And next to it, there's one without bootjacks. It's really hard to convince people these are the same species of tree. You look at those and first-timers just can't comprehend that it could possibly be the same, but this is what it looks like after the bootjacks fall off. So what's distinctive about palm leaves for the cabbage palm is that instead of just sort of falling off the way oak leaves or pine needles do, they just die in place and stay there until they're removed by either a physical or biological process. So here you can see on the right a cabbage palm, and this is one of the rare instances where all the fronds line up. So in this case, there are 8 fronds encircling the tree. So if you look at the colored illustration on the left, you can see, maybe if we start with the number 5, the purple one, then you can see 13 and 21. So these, in this case, it wasn't perfectly lined up, but that's how the leaves are. If you were to slice into the heart of the palm, that's how the leaves would be oriented. So if you get nothing else from this talk, you should take away the fact that palms are not grasses. The reason this is, I need to say this, is because you can find any number of websites that will tell you palm trees are grasses, and they're simply misinformed. If any of you had the old Golden Nature Guide, you can see that the grass family is one type of monocot, and the palm family is a different type of monocot. So to say that palms are grasses would be like saying orchids are cattails or bananas are pineapples. It's just not true. Now, cabbage palms are remarkably long-lived and very slow growing. It's not obvious to people, Some people think they're sort of like a big papaya. They live about 20 years. I'm convinced, I have evidence they live at least 200 years, and we don't really know beyond that. So here's a picture taken at New College. Of course, the picture on the left was taken before it was New College in 1943 or 44. And I went back and photographed the same palm in 2018. And you can see it hasn't grown that much in 75 years. They're particularly when they're, after they go through sort of a teenage growth spurt, once they're the size of the one that's in the first picture, they grow very slowly. They can produce a ridiculous amount of shade. Now, people will tell you, don't plant a palm tree. They don't produce any shade. What you want is an oak. Well, if you're reduced to planting a single tree, I would agree that an oak tree will produce more shade than a palm tree, but nobody ever said you only have to plant one tree. So there's big, lately there've been controversies on the East Coast, and I think in Fort Myers, people are trying to stop planting palm trees because they're not producing enough shade. Well, that's because they're not planting them closely together enough. So here's a parking lot in Sarasota. That's the shade from a single cabbage palm. Those of you who've been in Florida for a while know that sometimes it's worth parking a little further from the store entrance if you can park in the shade. And this is a picture from the canopy walkway at Mayac River State Park, and you can see how dense the palms are. This is a place called Boar Hammock. This is in Glades County. And if you zoom in, you can see on the right, a woods road, tire tracks. And then you can see that you really can't see the ground. It's a closed canopy of cabbage palms. So you can plant these things as close together as you can, and they will grow up and produce all the shade you can deal with. Now, cabbage palms are routinely over pruned. This is where my stepmother-in-law lives. This is just wrong. This is even worse. This was in St. Augustine Beach. Anytime you see that, you can see where the green leaves are coming out, and then there's sort of a pine cone or effect. Anytime you see that taper, the tree is dramatically over pruned. Now, the question is, well, if it's so bad, both, why do they do it, and how can the tree live? Well, these palms, as I'll show you, are fire resistant. And when a fire sweeps through the hammock and kills all the leaves, the palm has to have a strategy to grow new leaves. So it has a strength, which is that it can recover from having all of its leaves killed. But then that becomes a weakness when the landscapers get to them. This does weaken the tree. It takes a lot of effort to grow a completely new set of fronds. So there have been efforts to stop this practice. Historically, if you went online and looked, they would say, don't prune. You shouldn't prune above a 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock line. And that gave people permission to actually remove the green living fronds below that horizontal plane. And this is the illustration they would use. And here we have IFAS even telling people it's okay to remove the fronds below a 180-degree horizontal axis. But all that changed in 2017. This is the pruning standard adopted by the International Society of Arboriculture. It was revised in 2017. They don't mention 9 to 3 o'clock. They say the only reason to remove green fronds is for clearance. Well, what does clearance mean? Clearance means if it's brushing up against your automobile, if it's touching a building, if it's next to power wires, if it's interfering with something, then it's okay to remove them. But otherwise, they should remain on the plant. This is a handout that talks about this bad practice. And it says, green fronds are the palm's source of nutrients. Cutting green fronds stunts the growth, invites disease, reduces the palm's natural resilience to high winds. Removing branches with flowers. Now, they're not really branches, but flowers and berries takes important food away from birds and pollinators. So it's true, the more fronds you remove, the more vulnerable the tree is to high winds, which is counterintuitive, but the lower fronds protect the fronds above. So here's better advice from IFAS. It says some trees don't need to be pruned like our native cabbage palm. It automatically sheds its dead leaves. If you have palms that aren't self-cleaning, you may choose to prune them. Use a pole saw to remove brown fronds and leave the green fronds alone. Now, cabbage palms are really tough trees. They're probably, they're fireproof, floodproof, windproof, and frostproof. This is what cabbage palms look like when a fire moves through the hammock. There are very few trees that can withstand this intensity of fire. Here's another photograph. All those dead fronds are just like the old, I don't know about the Girl Scouts, but in Boy Scouts, there was a fire stick where you would take a branch or something and cut shavings partway down into it to increase the surface area so it would make great tinder. Well, that's exactly what these cabbage palms look like with their dead bootjacks. This is a photograph I took on Egmont Key. So there was a fire that went through the palm hammock, and then there was a storm that washed white sand up through the hammock, so it looks like snow. The trunks are completely charred, and you can see the leaves are regrowing. These trees are very flood tolerant. This is a condition out on the Mayaca River. It floods every year into the hammock adjacent to the river. There are very few trees that can survive this. There's your laurel oaks, live oaks, water locust, and the cabbage palms. That's about it. Very flood tolerant. They have a very high wind tolerance. A good book, if you're interested in trees and storms, is Stormscaping by Pamela Crawford. They did a lot of research and tried to understand which trees failed and why. This is a photograph from her book. So that's a live oak on the right. You can see virtually all the leaves and most of the twigs and small branches are removed. You can see the cabbage palm still has all its fronds. It's a little ruffled up, but even if you look in the distance, you can see cabbage palms that are intact. So a storm that'll do that to live oak, the palms will frequently come through that. Here's a former president after Hurricane Michael. You can see the pine trees in the background are completely stripped of needles. And again, the palm tree is kind of ruffled, but it's going to come back. They're also cold tolerant. I have a friend who's growing them in North Carolina. And you probably remember that bad freeze they had in Texas. They were predicting that the Texas sable palms would come back, but a lot of the other palms weren't going to make it. Now, having said they're resilient, they are threatened by a disease called lethal bronzing. Lethal bronzing is really strange. So here's a photograph. You can see two dead trees with their canopies lost and two ones that died more recently. And then if you look in the immediate vicinity, there's healthy ones. So it's not like a disease that spreads in an outward propagating wave that kills everything in its path. It's sort of selective in a manner that we don't quite understand. This is Dr. Brian Bader, who works for IFAS. That's a palm behind him that's dying of lethal bronzing. So lethal bronzing was first identified in Texas in 1980, and it was found in a phoenix palm. Those are the date palms. So for that reason, it was called Texas phoenix palm decline. It was first found in Florida, pretty near here up on the shores of Tampa Bay in 2006. And it's the organism that causes a tree to die is similar to a bacteria. It's called a phytoplasma, which is like a bacteria, but bacteria have cell walls and the phytoplasma don't. It's spread by an insect, and it's now called lethal bronzing. Now, one of the problems with the Texas Phoenix palm decline, I'm told, this may be apocryphal, but I was told that the Texas legislature was unwilling to fund research on anything that had the word Texas and decline in the same name. But more importantly, it doesn't work very well in Florida because people think of Texas as somewhere else and they think Phoenix is somewhere else. So it's hard for them to connect it up with Florida. So it's now called lethal bronzing, and that's because the phytoplasma is very similar to the phytoplasma that causes lethal yellowing in not cabbage palms, but coconut palms. So this is the little organism, Hyplaxius crutus, that spreads the disease. And it's pretty nefarious. It has lots of ways of spreading. So you could take a palm that's already infected and move it somewhere. That's not great. You could take the insect vector with palms and move it. The insect can hitch a ride on cars or in the wind. It's pretty small and lightweight. And it's also possible phytoplasma can live in other plants besides palms, particularly grasses, it seems like. So the symptoms of lethal bronzing: first, the death of the flowers. Now, if your landscaper has pruned all the flowers off, you're not going to notice that. And secondly, premature fruit drop. And if your landscaper has pruned all the inflorescences with the fruit off, you're not going to notice that either. But then what you'll see is the bronzing of the older, lower fronds, and that moves upward. Eventually, the spear leaf, which is the central leaf before it unfolds, dies. And then Dr. Bader refers to the final stage as the woodpecker phase, which is great. They are great trees for woodpeckers. There's no question about that. So here you see a photograph, and you can see the lowest frond on the right there has a sort of typical straw color of a dead frond, but that whole tier of fronds above it has a what we're calling the bronze color, and then above that are green fronds. So that's evidence of that bronze colored death moving up into the part of the tree. And there's that sort of the next to the last stage. This is what the spear leaf looks like. Before the leaf unfolds, it's this sort of rigid, folded up spear. And it only has one spear leaf, that's the bud. And so when that's gone, the tree will die. Woodpecker phase. Now, if you think you have a palm that may be dying of lethal bronzing, you can have that checked out because there are other things that kill palm trees. So in order to do that, you'll need a drill, you need to sterilize the drill, you need to drill into the trunk, collect some of the trunk material, and send it off. And if you go to IFAS, you can find that publication ENY 990, and that will explain how you do it. There is a fee associated with having the sample tested, but it would give you should give you a definitive answer. Now, if you're concerned, if you had specimen palms, you can treat them with oxytetracycline, but you have to do it every 3 months. It involves drilling a hole in the tree. That's not great for trees, and it's really not feasible if you think about a place like Mayaca Park or most any park. It's not feasible to go out and drill a hole in every palm tree every 3 months. So it's, unless it was a really rare specimen of some type, probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Once it's diagnosed, once you know for sure that it has lethal bronzing, it's fatal. There's nothing that can be done to save it. If you give it oxytetracycline, you could slow it down, but why would you do that? Because the more you slow it down, the more the Hyplaxius insect can feed on it and move it to other trees. So as soon as it's definite that it has this, you should remove it. but test positive, get it out of there. Now, even though I'm a big believer in cabbage palms, they can be invasive. And it's been said that if they weren't a native tree, they'd be on the invasive species list. And here, you can tell this is a pretty old article. Mrs. KLJ of Tampa says, she has Sabal palm plants springing up all over her yard. Some have grown to be 5 to 8 feet high. She asks, what's the easiest way to get rid of them? They're very difficult to dig up by the roots. And she hopes someone can tell her something that will kill the tree and rot out the trunk quickly. So this is my neighbor's lawn at the end of the street, and every one of those illuminated blades looks like grass as a baby cabbage palm. This is a lot in our neighborhood that I photographed, and you can see sort of the next stage, excuse me, where just a few leaflets are coming up. And then it will look like that. Now, what's going on here, I believe, is that this is a family that has access to loppers or pruners, but doesn't have access to a chainsaw. And so their efforts to fight back against these cabbage palms is limited to just removing the leaves. And then later it looked like this, and I drove by a week or two ago, and all these trees are gone. They finally hired somebody to come and take them all out. Excuse me for a second here. So it's not always a bad thing that they're invasive. Here's a cabbage palm. This was not planted. This was a volunteer at a big box store. It's growing next to a bench. Presumably some spouse could be inside shopping, and in a few years, this will produce shade. Here's a wall in Sarasota, downtown Sarasota, on bamboo, I believe. And all these, there was one oak, but all these are volunteer cabbage palms producing oxygen, helping to cool that wall. And again, I drove by recently and every one of them had been removed. Now, I did write a book, and there are 4 chapters that have something to do with the Sarasota area, and I thought I'd just tell you about a few of them. So this is 4 out of 24. The first chapter is called Anomalies, Oddball Palms Get Noticed and Collected. And this is a photograph from Google Earth Street View on 17th Street. And if you drive east on 17th, you'll see this strange operation this guy has. And his son, I believe, found a variegated cabbage palm and collected seeds, and he has grown them out. And there are, at this point, probably, I don't know, more than a dozen of these cabbage palms on his lot. And there I am on the right, standing in front of one of them, and you can see he's got various marble that he's put down. And then photograph on the left, I think, was photographed at Mayaca. So there is this variant of cabbage palms that lack pigmentation. Now, obviously, if the tree lacked all its chlorophyll, it couldn't grow at all. So there has to be sort of a balance between portions of the leaf that are producing chlorophyll and then these yellowish or whitish areas that aren't. This was a beautiful one that was down in the county Anderson building in Venice in the parking lot near the bird rookery. And I went down the other day and they've rejiggered the parking lot. This is gone. I don't know if anyone saved it, but it was a gorgeous plant. So there are diseases, and that was the name of the chapter. This was an expedition I took with Bruce Holst here in Sarasota to look to see if these trees had lethal bronzing. So you can read about that. Birds and bees and wildlife in the palm. So I talk about the importance of cabbage palms for pollinators, but let me, since this is Audubon, let me mention a bird relationship. Many of you recognize this gentleman, John Thaxton, and he's, aside from having been a county commissioner, he's a local expert on scrub jays. Now, I didn't take this picture. Tricia Norton took it, and I like it because it's a scrub jay perched in a cabbage palm, which is pretty unusual. Cabbage palms are not commonly thought of as scrub jay habitat. They prefer the scrub oaks, and too many cabbage palms, if they grow up, will ruin scrub jay habitat. And in fact, on more than one occasion, they've gone in and Oscar Shearer and deliberately killed large numbers of cabbage palms to try and keep the habitat more suitable for scrub jays. But what's interesting is that scrub jays apparently need cabbage palms, not for food, but for these fibers. Now, these fibers are found between the leaflets, and if you don't look for them, you might not ever notice them. But in between each leaflet, there tends to be one of these fibers. And the scrub jays will leave their territory, their family territory that they defend. They will fly across other jays' territory, which is a little reckless because they subject themselves to harassment by neighboring jays and also predation by raptors. And they will leave their territory to go gather these fibers, and they'll gather quite a few of them in their beak, and they will fly back to where they're nesting. And this is a scrub jay nest. Now, the scrub jays only use a nest once, so I got permission to have this collected. And you can see the exterior of the nest is constructed from oak twigs. Now, what John Thaxton tells me is that the birds do not hop around on the ground looking for oak twigs. They only go to dead branches on oaks. They snap the twigs off themselves and they fly back and create this armature. But you can see how spiky they are. And if you've worked with oaks at all, you know they're pretty tough. And if you were a baby bird, you probably wouldn't want to be sitting on a bunch of spiky oak twigs. So the scrub jays go and collect these fibers, and that's what the lining of the nest is. And in the book, I just describe my attempts to count these fibers and estimate how much work the jays had to go through in order to construct this that they're going to use just once. So that's quite a story. And it's possible that in other settings, apparently in some coastal settings, they'll use root hairs that are exposed on dunes. But as far as I know, in most cases, the jays are trying to get these fibers from the cabbage palms, even if they have to leave their territory. Another chapter is called Seminole Thatch Chickees and Tikis. And these are photographs from June in 2012. So I was able to go down with some, it was interesting. The Miccosukee have the rights to build these chickees, but the crew that I was traveling with were primarily Mexicans. And one of them was a Mexican Indian they called El Jefe. And when he would encounter Miccosukees, they would start speaking to him in their language, which the other Mexicans thought was hilarious because they were mistaking him for a Miccosukee when he was actually a Native American from Central America. This is what the habitat looked like. And this was a pygmy rattlesnake I ran across. We saw several when we were down there collecting fronds. And so here you see a cabbage palm, and this guy had an extension ladder, Jose, and he would go up with a machete and whack these fronds up. Now he couldn't believe, I told him that people where I lived used chainsaws to cut the fronds off. And he thought that was the craziest thing he'd ever heard, to be holding a chainsaw with one hand and trying to steady yourself just seemed fraught with problems. I was concerned because I thought, how could you possibly put a ladder on a cabbage palm and not have it rotate? And I asked him how many times he'd fallen. He said he'd never fallen. I said, well, how could that be? Well, he takes the top rung of the ladder and hooks it over one of the solid bootjacks. And so it's pretty much anchored up there. So there's his ladder, and there's a pile of fronds that he harvested. Then eventually all these fronds are collected and put in a trunk, and there are the 4 men and the crew. And then these were driven up to New College, where we constructed what we call a thatch room down near the bayfront. And you can see they take the petiole, the leaf stem, and that's nailed into two of the horizontal purlins. And what's going on in this scene is someone from below has a nail driven through a pole, and they're handing a green leaf up to the guy working on the roof. So that was in 2012. It's now 2023. Oh, here's 2012. This is what it looked like pretty much when it was done. But now it's 2023, and you can see they're starting to fail. So we got 11 years out of this roof, and it's going to need to be replaced. And I've tried to let people know that if they find the money to redo the roof, I'd like to go back out again to join them and just watch how the whole process unfolds again. And then chapter 20, palm abodes, a different approach to log cabins. Many of you are familiar with this facility in Mac River State Park. It's built from cabbage palm logs from the 30s. This is what it looks like inside. You probably may have used the restroom out there. This is actually, I think, was like assistant ranger or supervisor's house. I don't know how it's used now. And then there are the cabins, and these were elevated. They did flood again in Ian. They didn't elevate them quite enough. But these are all cabbage palm log structures. So Mac River State Park has the largest collection of cabbage palm log structures, I presume, anywhere on the planet, because cabbage palms are just found around here, and there's nowhere else that has this many. There's about 6 cabins, I think, and then there's the bathroom and the place I showed you first, and then that other building. So there's about at least eight structures there that are constructed from cabbage palm logs, and they've held up really well since the 1930s when they were built. So yes, I did write a book, as mentioned, the Palmetto Book, Histories and Mysteries of the Cabbage Palm. It's now available in paperback. And these people have helped me with some of the material in this show. I have a blog where I write about cabbage palm issues. It's called the Palmetto Book. Let's see if it comes up. palmettobook.blog. You can go there for information. I also on Instagram post photographs, Jono Cabbage Palm. And there's the book itself. And you can write me at cabbagepalm@gmail.com. So I'd be happy to at least respond to questions, even if I can't actually answer them. So I'll stop sharing at this point.
Wow, who knew?
Yeah.
Amazing. Can you say a little bit more about, are they really only in this area of Southwest Florida?
No, they're, as I said, they're found up the coast to North Carolina.
Oh, that's right.
Bald Head Island, and then over west to about Panama City, naturally. And then I have a chapter in the book that discusses the range both up the East Coast and along the Gulf Coast. So they'll grow in a number of places where they weren't found historically, which is kind of a puzzlement. Have to think about why that might be. But yes, they're primarily in peninsular Florida. That's sort of their home. They're found in the Bahamas, and they're found in Cuba as well.
Hi.
Holly Elmore asks, are palms actually trees? I may be confused, but I thought someone explained to me that palm trees are not trees.
Okay, well, it depends on who you talk to. So if you talk to a taxonomist, a plant taxonomist, they will tell you very clearly, cabbage palms are not trees. They can't be. It's impossible for them to be a tree because they're monocots, and they've made it the taxonomic dictum rule that no monocot can be a tree. So that's what the taxonomists think. So botanical taxonomists come at it that way. Now, field botanists, people that have to go out in the real world and deal with real plants and figure out what they are, use plant keys to identify plants. And you cannot identify a cabbage palm unless you make a choice to say it's a tree or tree-like or arborescent. So you can make a case in either direction. I personally, I note that we call them palm trees. We don't call them palm shrubs. So that seems significant. But I think more importantly, the fact that they function as trees. So when you go out to Mayaca Park and you're walking in the hammock and there's a closed canopy and it's shady on the ground, it doesn't really matter whether you're in the shade of a live oak or a cabbage palm. It has the same function in the ecosystem to keep the humidity up, provide shaded conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I view, to me, to say at that point, well, it's not a tree, and yet it's doing all the hard work of a tree. That's functionally a tree. And so I tend to view them as trees, but if you know a taxonomist that wants to assert they're not trees, you can agree with them. That's okay.
Stephen Etcher wants to know what animals or birds use the fruit for food.
Oh man, well, I do have a long list in the book that I might be able to find quickly, but I mean, cedar waxwings, I see a lot, mockingbirds, squirrels. Let me see if I can just find this quickly and I could read you a little so you get a sense. 126.
I used to get cardinals and mockingbirds and blue jays in my cabbage palm eating the berries.
Okay. So I'll read a little here. Florida scrub jays are just one species of birds that utilize cabbage palms. Other birds no doubt use palm fiber for lining their nests as well. The most prosaic use of the palm is simply as a perch. And while I've only found photographs of 30 species using cabbage palm as perches, the actual number is no doubt far higher. What is intriguing is not the perch use so much as other more specialized uses. Audubon's caracaras nest in live cabbage palms, and ospreys sometimes build nest platforms on dead cabbage palms. Vultures roost on them, breaking down the leaves with their weight. Nest-making hummingbirds are said to use other cabbage palm fibers that occur where the leaves meet the trunk, but I've been unable to confirm that. I can't find any source that says that. Florida has 8 species of woodpeckers. All but 3, the red-cockaded, hairy, and red-headed, are likely to be seen working on cabbage palms. The smallest species, the downy, works the leaves and bootjacks and can make quite a racket hammering away. Migratory sapsuckers have been known to riddle the trunks with round, oozy holes to create gummy feeding stations. I've seen this most often where the trunk is constricted or necks down for some reason. Flickers and red-bellied woodpeckers can also be found on cabbage palms, but the most dramatic are the pileated woodpeckers, which frequently nest in dead palms. Some standing palms have multiple woodpecker holes and look like immense standing flutes, and swarms of honeybees have been known to occupy old woodpecker nests. So yeah, there's a lot of birds that use them. I have a photograph of a bear up in a cabbage palm in the book. They eat the fruit and sometimes nap up there. Raccoons nap up there. I have photographs of giraffes at the Disney Animal Kingdom eating cabbage palm leaves. I've got a photograph of a manatee eating ferns. You know, cabbage palm fell in a spring run and the manatees are eating the ferns that grow there. So almost any animal in Florida could have had some interaction with a cabbage palm at one time or another.
Including humans, right?
Yes, and so that we have a chapter, I have a chapter in the book about, well, a number of chapters, one about using them for residences, but also about eating them as swamp cabbage.
So
Speaking
Jer-
How does that work for swamp cabbage? Sorry, I mean,
Well, it kills the tree, it kills the tree to eat swamp, to make swamp cabbage. So the way I once rented a booth at the Swamp Cabbage Festival in LaBelle just to see what that was like. And I had to try to explain to people, since it was a swamp cabbage festival, a lot of people were curious about swamp cabbage, and they said, well, where are the cabbages? They sort of assumed there was something like a coconut that grew up in the canopy, and if you had a long pole, you could pick this cabbage. So it took me a while, but I finally figured out the best way to explain it to him was to envision a stalk of celery that you get from the supermarket. And when you get that stalk of celery, the outer leaves are the greenest, the biggest, and the toughest. And as you pull those leaves away and go closer and closer to the center, the leaves get smaller, paler, and more tender. And so what you're really eating is the growing bud of the celery, just as you're eating the sort of the bud of the cabbage itself. So with the cabbage palm, you cut the bud off the tree, which is a lot of work, either with an axe or a chainsaw, although I've met people that don't recommend using a chainsaw. And then you remove those outer tough leaves to get to the center. And because the tree is so much bigger than a stalk of celery, you end up with something maybe about that big around and pretty long. And then you cut that up and put it in ice water. You can eat it raw in a salad, which is how I prefer it, or people cook it up with a variety of spices and bacon. And to me, it's sort of a stone soup endeavor because they've added so many different ingredients. Probably tastes pretty good no matter what you started with. But that's swamp cabbage, and it was a mainstay of cracker diets, early settlers. It was also served at, I'm sure, places like Mar-a-Lago as millionaire salad, presumably because it was sort of a thrill that you had to kill a tree in order to have some salad. But it's not really a problem in places where there's a lot of cabbage palms. If you were in a section of the country where there weren't that many, I think it would be frowned upon to be cutting them down just to eat them.
We
do
have
they grow them as a crop? Sorry, Karen. Do they grow them as a crop, Jono?
Not cabbage palms, no. They do grow. If you go to buy hearts of palm in a store, it would be from a Central American palm, and I assume those are grown in groves, or yeah.
So there's two comments relating to this, interestingly enough.
Okay.
So Philip Andrews says, my father talked about cutting cabbage as a youngster in Bradford County, Florida in the late 1920s. I understand that this kills the tree. Does this practice still exist? So yes, that answered his question. But then Ray Vinson said, you may have mentioned as I arrived late, but bears would eat cabbage palm hearts, and it's presumed their abundance in scrub and flatwoods is due to extirpation of bears. So I'm thinking the cabbage palm abundance is due to lack of bears.
I hadn't heard that. I had heard, this is fascinating, and it's something that, when you're writing a book, you can't run down every lead. The bears will go and eat the heart out of a young palm. They'll just rip it out with their claws. Then what happens is North America's largest weevil, which is a palm weevil, will come and lay eggs in that decomposing plant matter. When the plant's injured like that, it sends out a chemical signal that will attract these weevils, and the weevils will lay their eggs. Well, what they found is that the bears will come back and eat the weevil larvae, these big grubs. So the question is that simply a random occurrence where the bears have a territory and they move through the territory in some sort of predictable or regular pattern, and so they kill the palm 1 month and then happen to come by it again and they eat it? Or are they farming weevil grubs? Like, do they know I'm going to do this now and I'm going to watch and I'll come back and get a second meal. So, yeah, that's an interesting question. Let me see here on the subject of hearts of palm if people are. This is interesting because this is a quote many people have run across. And this is about the fruit, not the heart of the palm. Personally, I find the taste of cabbage palm fruit to be reminiscent of dates, as is the general experience, since there's a papery outer layer, a vaguely sweet and somewhat granular fresh flesh, and a hard seed. Green Dean's Eat the Weeds website describes the fruit as having a bittersweet, thin fruit coating on the seeds, which are about the size of the pea. The layer of fruit is extremely thin, a skin really, but it does have a prune-like flavor. Reed Tillery, writing in Surviving in the Florida Wilds, reports Seminoles would remove the stalks of ripe palmetto fruit and grind both the rock-hard seeds and pulp with a mortar before serving on a plate. Tillery agreed the berries taste vaguely like prunes and are sufficiently palatable. Whether they taste more like dates or prunes, do not be dissuaded from trying cabbage palm fruit by the negative palmetto fruit review penned by shipwreck survivor Jonathan Dickinson and published in 1699. In addition to opining that they had an irksome taste that could take your breath away, he famously described palmetto berries as follows: "They gave us some of their berries to eat. We tasted them, but not one among us could suffer them to stay in our mouths, for could compare the taste of them to nothing else but rotten cheese steeped in tobacco." But take heart. Here is the description of his palmetto. The wilderness country looked very dismal, having no trees, but only sandhills covering with shrubby palmetto, the stalks of which were prickly, that there was no walking amongst them. So what Jonathan Dickinson was describing was saw palmetto, and or possibly Sabal. And so I definitely recommend trying Sabal palm fruit. They do have a hard pit, so you can't crunch down on them, but they're not half bad.
Good to know.
We have-
There's a bunch more. You want to ask the
Yeah.
Q&A?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Jerry Van Dyke asks, my landscaper calls a Chinese fan palm a cabbage palm. Are they related?
Well, yes and no. They're related in that they're all palms, but they're not closely related. I mean, it's a different genus, so same family, different genus.
Stephen Hoffman says, very informative talk. Our HOA has a policy of aggressively pruning palm trees.
Yep.
Their logic is that the growth provides habitat for rats. Is this?
Oh, I love the rat question. Thanks so much. Okay, so here's my take on the rat issue. And it's absolutely true that rats go up in cabbage palm. So if somebody wants to log out now and take that message home, they can, but hear me out. Rats do about three things. They eat, they sleep, and they make more rats. And so they got to sleep somewhere. They can sleep in a palm tree in your yard, or if you got no palm trees, where are they going to go? They're going to go in your house. And the fact is, everywhere there are rats. If you walk around the Sarasota City Hall building, you'll find these rat bait stations. They try to camouflage them and look like gray rocks, but they're all plastic bait stations. There are rats everywhere. And not only that, all your neighbors are feeding rats. Now, if you told them they were feeding rats, they would deny it, but they are, and here's how they do it. First, if they have fruit trees, if they have any fruit trees whatsoever in their yard, they're feeding rats. Secondly, and this is for Audubon, if they have a bird feeder, they're feeding rats. If they have a compost pile that is not completely closed up and sealed, but they just walk out the back door and throw the banana peels in some corner of the yard, they're feeding rats. So everybody's feeding rats. People put food out for the raccoons, or their cat eats outside, they're feeding rats. So there are rats everywhere. They got to have a place to sleep. I would rather have them sleep in a palm tree than in my attic. But if you want them in the attic, just get rid of your palm trees and knock yourself.
Oh, I better start planting a lot of palms right now. So Stephen, I'm sorry, Susan Shuttlegum says, what an amazing plant. I enjoyed the book and this discussion. If I wanted to plant a cabbage palm, where would I go to buy it? And what is the best location?
Well,
Sunny, dry, wet, etc. to plant it.
Yeah, you can go out to the native nursery at the end of Fruitville Road. That'd be
Florida
great.
Native Plants, Inc.
Right, Florida Native Plants, or you can go up to Sweet Bay. But you're going
Cherish.
to get a plant in a pot this big. And here's what I say about that. If you get a couple of those cabbage palms in like a 10-gallon pot, do not buy a hammock on the same day, because it is going to be decades before you string a hammock between those two trees. You can buy a small seedling like that, and it's fun to watch it grow, but it's not going to turn into a tree very rapidly. Now, what's really crazy and fortunate is that you can buy a mature palm, whatever size you want. You can buy them with 8-foot trunks or 20-foot trunks or 30-foot trunks. And there are any number of vendors that, here's the way it works. And I have a chapter about this as well. Nobody, and I think somebody was asking this question related to the hearts of palm. Nobody is growing palm trees from seed in an orchard or a nursery. What's going on is people go out to ranches like the Turner Ranch or the Longino Ranch or the Carlton Ranch, and they pay the ranchers to be able to dig up cabbage palms. They remove 90% of the leaves. They dig them up. They remove probably 90% of the root system. When you dig up a cabbage palm, every root, or virtually every root, is going to die. It's going to have to grow an entirely new set of roots. So they'll bring those palms back and wrap them with burlap around the root ball, what's left of it, and keep them watered. And if you plant them and water them, they should recover. Steve Griffin of Griffin Nurseries created a new approach. And what he does is he'll dig the palm. It's called pulling palms because they actually cut around them and just pull them up out of the ground after severing the roots. He'll bring them into his nursery and he will wrap them in plastic and then irrigate them for a number of months until they start to grow a new canopy. And then they'll take them to where you are and take the plastic off. And it's almost like a root bound plant. Now, normally you don't want a plant to be root bound in a pot, but with the palms, they're all just sort of waiting to expand out. And so you can buy a tree that is going to get a full canopy much sooner than if you got one that looks more like asparagus, because once most of the tree's roots are gone, it can't really support many leaves. And in a cabbage palm, this is counterintuitive, but the roots can go out 40 or 50 feet in each direction. So they really need an elaborate root system to support all those leaves. And so it takes them a while to regain their strength and grow new roots and new leaves. So yeah, you can either buy little ones or you can buy mature ones.
I put the website in the chat if anyone's interested.
Okay, that's great.
Meredith McKinley wants to know what makes them fire resistant.
Ooh, that is a really good question. Okay, so if you think about a regular old dicot tree like a pine or an oak, we were all taught that it has bark, and then under the bark is this cambium layer. And the cambium layer is like, that's the growing part. That's the living part. And so you can see that unless you had a thick insulating bark like a melaleuca, if you have a relatively thin bark and it's exposed to a lot of heat, that's going to go through the tree and cook that layer, and it's going to kill the tree. Now, the cabbage palm, being a monocot, doesn't have a cambium layer. There's no ring. It doesn't grow rings. You can't cut one down and count the rings because there just aren't any rings. There's no cambium layer. Instead, all the vascular tissue is distributed through what's called the central cylinder, the trunk of the tree. And so it doesn't really care. You can go, you saw the ones on Egmont Key. You can go up to one with a blowtorch and stand there as long as you want, but it's not going to get to the part of the tree where the metabolic fluids are moving up and down. So that's how they survive fire. And that, and the fact that the older fronds are protecting the bud. So if you were to cut all the fronds off and just leave the bud, that might be a way to kill it. But when it has all those fronds around it, the outer fronds may suffer, but it'll protect the growing tip, and so then it'll recover.
Wow. Sheila Fagan asks about, she says she's confused about the presence of bootjacks. Are they
Yes.
present on younger trees and then fall off as the tree ages and
Yes.
develops a smoother appearance? I have
Yes,
that same question.
but it's not directly related to age. So I've found all different crazy variants. So I found a tree that had no bootjacks, then no bootjacks, and then the bootjacks associated with the canopy. I found the opposite. I found a tree on Geneva Road that had bootjacks on one side and no bootjacks on the other side. So in a conventional dicot tree, let's take a maple that's deciduous, or a hickory, whatever you want, the leaf only lives for so long. And so before the leaf falls off, what's called an abscission layer forms. And this abscission layer is sort of a sealed off layer between the twig and the rest of the leaf. And then when that's in place and all the tree's removed all its nutrients, it'll fall off. So that's how it works in a dicot. With the cabbage palm, the leaf's there and it pulls nutrients out of the leaf as it's dying, but then it doesn't do anything else. It just sits there. It doesn't spend any energy building this layer. The leaf just dies in place and stays there. Now, so the question is, when's it going to go away and what's going to make it go away? Well, somebody with a chainsaw could make it go away. A fire could make it go away. What I've concluded, the most common thing is that the attachment to the trunk gets weakened by fungus and insects like ants. And so you can imagine when we have our rainy season, you have these upturned leaves, they're capturing water and it's channeling down along the trunk. It's creating really moist conditions for fungus to start decomposing that. So the fungus will weaken the attachment of the remaining leaves. And then at some point when it's weak enough, a windstorm or as I say, an upwardly mobile raccoon will come along and pull those off. And you'll frequently see a situation where there'll be a whole clattering, like a collection of fronds that all came off more or less at the same time. So it's not like there's a chronological one. This one will fall off and then 2 weeks later, that one will fall off and then the next one. And so we could do an experiment. We could grow cabbage palms and we could douse them with fungicides for 30 years and then see if the boots remained on the tree, but no one has the patience to treat a tree with fungicide for 30 years. So we don't actually know, but I'm pretty sure it's fungus and insects, particularly carpenter ants and other insects that are weakening that attachment.
So one of the things that I noticed, and I was telling you earlier, Jono, is that after Hurricane Ian, our golf course used the fact that they were going to collect all the trees that did fall over and went and cut all the Sabal palms down. And I'm not even sure, to be honest. I think they're so pretty, or at least a lot of the ones here seem to have just bootjacks. But it struck me as like, it felt like they were completely sterilizing the Florida landscape. You know, we already have the golf grass or whatever the grasses are, but it felt like we were losing anchors around trees, as I told you earlier. And it's really sad to me how the landscape looks somewhat sterile. This is Florida.
Margie, did they actually cut them down, or did they maybe remove them and sell them? Or did they actually
No, they cut them down.
They cut them down and
Yeah.
they took out the root and.
Well, actually, I don't know that they took the roots out, but they must have.
So, you know, what's funny is the Florida landscape industry got standards adopted for what you can sell as a plant. So if you're selling trees, you're not supposed to sell a crooked tree that goes up straight and then goes off at an angle somewhere. That's like not good. You're not supposed to do that. However, with a cabbage palm, if the cabbage palm bends or curves, they charge more money for that. So they're called with character. And so if there's some roundabout in town. Oh, I think it's there's a roundabout I go by. I can't visualize it, but they have all these bent and leaning cabbage palms that people paid extra for. So frequently, if there is a bad storm, sometimes the palms will lean. That's no reason to remove the palm. What'll happen, and you'll see this along the banks of the Mac River, it's very dramatic. The bank will start to erode and the palm will fall in at an angle. But then if it's there long enough, it'll start to turn upward again. Let's see, like this. And so you can see these curving palms along the bank. And that means the bank's been pretty stable for decades because it fell when it was straight and then it gradually turned upright again.
Well, I must say, I guess our golf course gardeners have a limited imagination for aesthetics.
Yeah, well, and you know, some people like them all pruned up, but I think
they just cut them down at the root, and it felt like a violation somehow to me, but they didn't ask me to help.
Right.
There's a really interesting question in the chat.
Yes.
John Hoover says, I'm working on habitat improvement out on the Spoil Islands and have had trouble with marsh rabbits eating some of our plantings. Notably, sabal palms are frequently eaten down to dirt. It is not practicable to fence all of the plantings. I have been collecting sabal palm berries in the neighborhood in hopes that if I broadcast once the rainy season starts, that enough of them will sprout that perhaps we can get ahead of the rabbits. Any suggestions?
No. Is this on the Jim Neville Islands or where?
I'm gonna let's see.
That's interesting. I've seen where hogs will root up cabbage palms, baby ones, to eat the sort of root ball. But I didn't know rabbits were rough on them.
John, I'm gonna allow you to talk. John, join the group, unmute yourself, and you can answer Jono. Go ahead, John, you're on. You've unmuted. Is your microphone on? Huh.
Well, I can respond. It doesn't really matter whether it's the Jim Neville Islands or not. So cabbage palms are great places to get cabbage palms established because cabbage palms really like shelly soil. And so if there's one weakness they have, it's they like basic soil. They're not as crazy about acid soil. So growing on spoil is perfect for them. And they're really characteristic of Indian mounds. If you go visit any of the Indian mounds around, you'll see a lot of cabbage palms. But obviously, apparently, that early stage when they're little, they're vulnerable to being eaten. And I heard about that, but I would be interested in going out and seeing that sometime. That's interesting.
So Sheila Fagan wants to know, she's seen a screech owl roosting and nesting in a sabal palm in her community. Is it uncommon for an owl of this species to nest in a palm?
No. I don't know.
Sabal palm. So, doesn't sound like it.
Oh.
John Hoover says, yes, in Neville, for some reason, he can't get
Must be the settings on the computer. Sorry, John. We tried.
Well, so I talked with John Ryan recently, and I know John's been working to try and eliminate invasives and get some natives going out there. So I imagine Mr. Hoover's familiar with that as well. So that would be an interesting project.
They need you.
Well, what I think it sounds like what they need is something that eats rabbits is what they
Yeah.
need.
And the final question is, what are some of the uses of cabbage? Oh, I'm sorry. How wide are palm roots spread?
40 to 50 feet from the tree.
You said that.
And,
Great.
and here's what's interesting now that you mention it. So a cabbage palm root, because it's also a monocot and doesn't have secondary growth, that root is going to be basically the same diameter next to the trunk as it is 50 feet out. Now it'll have little rootlets and root hairs that stick off of it, but the root itself is going to be the same diameter. Now, if you think about it, when you walk around downtown and you see these black olives and oaks that have been planted in an urban setting, you start seeing the pavement or the pavers are getting lifted
Yeah.
up. That's because that oak root is just like an oak trunk. Each year, it's going to increase in diameter. So when it goes under the sidewalk or under the paver and keeps getting bigger each year, there's going to be problems. And so the cabbage palms are really good at not lifting pavers. And so that's because the roots may go out, but they're not suddenly going to get bigger on you.
So
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's just they're as I mentioned, they're really looked down upon as an urban street tree, but I think that's just because people aren't being very creative. They're not planting them closely together enough, and if they would do so, they could have plenty of shade. And if they were creative, they could figure out how to put the lights on the trunks. And the other thing you'll see in an urban setting is you'll see they planted a tree, and then there's this cast iron tree grate around it, and they have to come periodically around with a torch and cut little segments of it out to accommodate the expanding trunk. Well, there's no expanding trunk for the cabbage palm. You buy a 10-foot tall cabbage palm, you plant it, you can run pavers or whatever you want right up to it. You don't have to come back subsequently and pull those out of the way because the trunk's never going to get any bigger. It escapes people. It's not, people don't think about it, but when you look at a palm, it's the same diameter at ground level, a cabbage palm, as it is 20 feet up in the air. And so they don't get bigger. The other thing you should look for, which you'll notice now that I mention it, is if you look at the palms, you look at a tall one out at Mayaca or wherever, you look near the base of the tree and the leaf scars will be maybe an inch apart. And then as you look up higher and higher, they get closer and closer together. By the time you're up near the canopy, they look like a phonograph record. So the older and taller they get, the less incremental growth there is. They sort of slow down. And when you think about it, that's like our Sabal minor and Sabal Atonia, because here's a tree, here's a plant that keeps putting out leaves, but never develops a trunk. So it's sort of like a recirculating fountain. These leaves are coming out in the center and going out, but it never really gains in height. And so it's easy to imagine that cabbage palm behaving like that. It's funny, like when you go out to Mayaca Park and hopefully I don't know if they've reopened the canopy walkway, but when you look out at the canopy, it really seems like a lot of the palms are pretty much the same height. Now, one explanation is they all germinated in the same year and they all grew at the same rate, and that's why they're all the same height. The other explanation is some of them slowed down and some of them speeded up, and they sort of agreed on a canopy, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. You can find locations. I think I've seen some along the Tamiami Trail when you're crossing the Everglade, where there'd be some emergent palms that are significantly taller than others. But in general, you tend to see palms with a kind of a consistent canopy. And it's curious to think about exactly why that is.
In closing, I think it's fascinating, and it's really important that people start thinking about Sabal palms along streets and everything you're saying. And to that end, everybody, please buy his book and get your local people to start growing more Sabal palms. We need to stay native in this. That's the least we can do.
And I didn't dwell on it, but this is one of our most important pollinator plants. If you ask people to envision a pollinator butterfly garden, people are going to picture something that's under waist height. They're going to have some annuals and they have some firebush and this, that, and the other. They don't look up. And that's because pines are wind pollinated, oaks are wind pollinated. And so what they're doing for pollinators is minimal. But cabbage palms produce hundreds of thousands of flowers that are heavily used by bees and a lot of other insects, both honeybees and native, bees. And so if you find a relatively short one that's in bloom, it's almost like watching a saw palmetto in bloom, just covered with insects. And so if you're interested in pollinators and supporting them, definitely leave your cabbage palms, because throughout the summer, they are a really important source of nectar.
Right. What a fascinating, provocative, geez, I never thought about that kind of talk. This is just great. Thank you so much, Jono.
Well,
John.
It was absolutely wonderful, as usual, Jono. You hit it. It's just great. A lot of information.
I must say, one of the reviews people wrote is that it's the funniest natural history book they ever read, and I thought that.
Yeah,
Right,
really wonderful.
Thanks for the opportunity. I wish I could be there in person to meet everyone and sell them each a book, but they can find it. You can get them directly from the university press. You can order them. I would go to a local bookseller, independent bookseller, but obviously you can get them from Amazon as well.
And you're right here in Sarasota, so thank you very much.
If we wanted to put some in our store, where would we buy them? Would we buy bulk from?
Yeah, just contact the University Press of Florida.
Okay.
Okay, unless you work with other bookstore, but yeah, you can buy them directly from the University Press.
Okay, great. When was that published?
Oh, now I guess a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, right. I bought it. I have it. So.
Okay. Oh, and my recommendation is don't feel obligated to read it from front to back. I would pick up the book and find a chapter. If the chapter on Elvis catches your eye, read the chapter on Elvis first. That you don't have to read them in order.
Yeah, each chapter is another story. And what did you tell us? You had 35 more chapters?
No, there were 9 more chapters.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.
All right.
So our May speaker, our last speaker for the season will be May 8th. It will be the Florida Keys Hawk Watch, which is more or less in the center of the Keys. Mariah Heinwich and Luis Glees will be talking about their work in the southernmost hawk migration monitoring site in the continental United States. It's located in Marathon. It's played an important role for more than a decade toward understanding raptor populations, continually tracking the movement of birds as they prepare to cross the Florida Straits and the Gulf of Mexico into the Caribbean. And you never know, but there's more and more interesting, unusual birds that they're finding, I guess, because of climate change and climate weather patterns and all. So they're great birders, and you'll learn all about hawk watches. So please join us May 8th.
I look forward to it.
Likewise.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please don't forget to submit your ballot when you get it later on today, and we'll see you next month.
All right. Night all. Stop.
Good. Very good.
Oh, Jean, you're in charge tonight. You have to close it.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. So here we go. Good night, everybody.
Good night.